Welcome, everyone.
Hello, Nikki. Hello, Stefan. Yeah, we can see the numbers certainly coming on. Welcome.
Welcome. Great to see so many folks joining us today for a virtual rock jumper birding adventure to Texas. Thank you for taking the time to join us. Keith Valentine and myself, Nikki Stewart from Rock Jumper Birding Tours, immensely enjoy our time with you during these webinars. A quick note that if you are new to Zoom, the Q&A box is at the bottom of your screen where you may send your questions and we will answer as many as we can during and after the webinar. Today we go to Texas, famous for having produced a riot of ABA rarities over the years and well regarded as a migration hotspot with plenty of specials, but also famous for barbecues, jumbo shrimps, Big Bend National Park, spectacular spectacle of mass bird migration along the Gulf Coast, golden-cheeked warblers of the hill country, and the Lost Maples State Park. Leading us is Stephan Lorenz from Rock Jumper Birding Tour. Stephan has been instrumental in the design of the Texas tours based on his extensive knowledge of the birds in the area, allowing guests to see a variety of habitats and lots of birds. He is a superb naturalist with solid background, academic background, and knowledge of many herbs, fish, mammals, plants, as an addition to birds. Stephan is brilliant at dealing with a variety of participants, getting everyone on the birds and allowing photographers good opportunities for taking photos. Welcome, Stephan.
Thank you, Nikki. Thank you, Keith, for the nice introduction. And to everybody out there, thank you for taking the time and joining me as I will talk about birding in Texas. This is a place that's really near and dear to my heart in terms of birding. This is where I started birding about 20 years ago, so very lucky in that regard to be able to live in a really diverse area with lots of birds to see. And I still spend a lot of time in the state, traveling to different corners, exploring more of it and adding to my bird list, of course. And I've enjoyed serving on the Texas Bird Records Committee for the past 6 years and adding to the state list as we're accepting new records and new bird species. So for this tour, I'll take you through our itinerary roughly, and I'll introduce some of the major birds and habitats that we cover, and I hope you will enjoy it. So one thing that's really nice about visiting Texas in the spring is you get the overlap of migrants, resident species, a few wintering birds, and of course migrants that return to Texas to breed. So to give you an example here, in the upper corner here, you can see a Hudsonian godwit. This is one of the examples of a spring migrant. Many shorebirds move through Texas, and this bird species is actually on its way from southern South America to the high Arctic breeding grounds. And they pass through Texas in good numbers, oftentimes using flooded rice fields. In April, we also still have some lingering winter birds, like the sedge wren, for example. They will be calling and singing already before they leave to Midwestern prairies or further north to breed. We, of course, also have residents. We can't leave out the Texas state bird, the Northern Mockingbird, well known for its mimicry of other bird songs. Males can know up to 150 songs individually. And April also brings the return of many neotropical migrants that have wintered either in Central or South America, and they'll return to Texas to breed, like this stunning and colorful painted bunting, which is fairly common on the Texas coast and in the hill country as a nesting species. This bird has a really fascinating migration pattern for a passerine. It actually moves in the fall to southeast Arizona and northern Mexico to molt before it flies further south to its wintering grounds. It's quite rare that passerines have this type of molt migration. But before we go any further, we all have to realize that everything is bigger in Texas, of course. And here you can see our average greater roadrunner. But all jokes aside, Texas is indeed a big place. It's the second largest state in the US, only Alaska is larger. It spans 790 miles north to south and 660 miles across. To the west, it's bounded by New Mexico, on the north by Oklahoma, to the east by Arkansas and Louisiana, and on its southern border, it shares an international border with Mexico along the Rio Grande, and of course has a lot of coastline along the Gulf of Mexico, really creating a great diversity of habitats, and we'll spend quite a bit of time on the shores of the Gulf of Mexico, which are very diverse bird-wise. So if you take a look here, here's a map showing the ecoregions of Texas. It's very diverse going east to west. Most folks think of Texas as relatively flat, but in fact, in the far west, we have mountains that rise to nearly 9,000 feet or 2,500 meters. During our tour, we'll visit the Piney Woods region, one of the wetter spots in East Texas, and we'll travel through the post oak savanna, blackland prairies. We'll spend quite a bit of time on the Edwards Plateau, also known as the Hill Country, one of the most interesting regions of Texas with many of the specialty birds. We'll travel south to the South Texas Plains, which support live oak forest, coastal prairies, and subtropical thorn scrub. And then we'll travel up the coast to bird the coastal marshes and wetlands and beaches. So really diverse in terms of habitats. Here's just a map showing some of the major rivers in Texas. We'll actually cross most of these as we move east to west. Most interestingly, we'll reach the edge of the Nueces River, which is fairly far west and will give us a lot of bird species more typical of the Chihuahuan Desert, for example, really adding to the total. An interesting fact is that Texas does not have any natural lakes except for Caddo Lake in the northeast. Pretty much all the other larger lakes and reservoirs are man-made. Let me just give you a brief overview of the itinerary. So most of our tours start in Houston or San Antonio, but starting in Houston is very convenient. It's one of the largest cities in the US, has 2 million people. The greater metropolitan area has 7 million people. So it's a big place, but still has a lot of good bird habitat within and around the city. So it's really easy to reach from anywhere in the US and even easy to reach internationally. From here, we travel west, just a little bit southwest of San Antonio to spend some time on the Edwards Plateau. We will head south of Kingsville and visit the world famous King Ranch. And then we'll head back up the coast with many stops along the way to take advantage of the migrant traps and coastal refuges on the upper Texas coast, where migration will be in full swing. Then we'll make a quick dash up to the Piney Woods. We'll actually spend just a day there to look for the many Piney Woods specialty birds before looping back around to Houston. So even though this looks like a relatively small portion of Texas, we do cover about 2,000 miles. Fortunately, most of the longer drives are broken up by productive birding stops. So let's take a quick look at the numbers here. We can expect around 300 species during about 10 and a half, 11 days of birding. So that's quite a high total for the ABA area. Texas has a total of 655 species on its list, second only to California. We can see up to 15 species of raptors. Many will be breeding, some will be migrating through. An incredible 35 species of shorebirds. Pretty much any shorebird species that migrates through the central US will be passing through Texas. 10 vireos. Texas has the highest diversity of nesting vireos in a relatively small geographic area. And that's because east meets west here. So we have eastern species reaching their western range limit and western species reaching the eastern range limit, and they oftentimes breed side by side. And 20 sparrows, one of my favorite groups. Some of these will be breeding and nesting species, and others will still be lingering on their winter grounds. And then probably one of the highlights for many bird watchers coming to North America and witnessing migration are the wood warblers. we can see up to 35 species of wood warblers on this tour. About 1/3 of these will be on their breeding territories, so we'll get to see them sing and potentially even build nests already. And the other 2/3 will be migrating through, and we'll catch up with those in the migration traps on the upper coast and other parts during the tour. So on the right here, you can see an example of a resident wood warbler in Texas, the pine warbler, pretty common in East Texas, and the only wood warbler known to switch to a diet of seeds during the winter months, so which allows it to winter much further north than other species of wood warblers. Most of the other species migrate to Central or South America or the West Indies for the winter. Some other highlights on this tour are there's a good diversity of mammals. We'll always keep an eye out for those. Reptiles will be quite active. We can see a good diversity of lizards, maybe some snakes. And amphibians will be really vocal during the springtime as they're setting up to breed. So especially during any nocturnal or evening outings, we can enjoy a chorus of frogs. The hill country will be in full bloom this time of year with many different species of wildflowers, absolutely stunning displays of wildflowers. And the big thicket is botanically really interesting. Another place where east meets west and a really high diversity of plant life there. We'll experience a varied scenery in wilderness areas from hardwood bottomland forests all the way to desert scrubs, grasslands, freshwater marshes, and everything in between. Hotels are really comfortable. The Niels Lodge is a highlight. It's centered, it's right in the middle of the hill country with lots of habitat right around the cabins there along the beautiful Rio Frio River. And in terms of meals, we'll have a really varied cuisine, home-style American cooking. We'll try some Cajun food while we're in East Texas. Mexican food is quite popular in Texas. And we'll also have some Italian and Vietnamese in between. So it's really varied in terms of cuisine and something for everybody. Like I said, there'll be a good selection of mammals. We'll definitely see some swamp rabbits along the way. And if anybody enjoys butterflies and dragonflies, Texas is a great place to see a high diversity of those and photograph them, particularly during spring when they're really active. And we'll always take a little look at those too and try to identify what we see. But the birding starts in earnest in the hill country. So here you can see our group. It's just west of San Antonio. I believe we're setting up to look for black-capped vireos, one of the specialties here. And you can see a wonderful display of wildflowers in the foreground already. So that's basically what the entire hill country looks like during the springtime. And the hill country is home to many resident birds and some of the most special migrants too. One of the common species here is the golden-fronted woodpecker. This is a subtropical species, spills over into Texas and a bit into Oklahoma. It feeds quite a bit on seeds and fruits, including prickly pear or cactus fruit. And it's quite common here and vocal. Another common resident in the hill country is the black-crested titmouse. This species was split from the tufted titmouse a few years ago. Black-crested has a black forecrown and a pale forehead compared to the tufted titmouse. And there's a large zone of hybridization in Texas actually between the two species that are now recognized. And we will even see some migrants in some spots, but we will see pure black-crested titmice and tufted titmice in the east on either side of that hybridization zone. But a real lively vocal bird. And the beautiful Vermillion Flycatcher is quite common in open habitats in South Texas. The males have this wonderful display flight where they rise 20 to 30 meters above the canopy and do a very slow butterfly-like flight while they're calling. And this is definitely always a highlight to see. In the hill country, we can also find lark sparrows nesting. This is a fairly large and distinctive sparrow. And the males have this really comical display where they strut around on the ground like a turkey. They raise their tail, display white tail spots. And the females have also pretty unique breeding behavior. They're known to reuse the old nests of other passerines for nesting. So not only a distinctive looking sparrow, but also quite unique in behavior. And here we'll also try to find the rufous crowned sparrow, quite uncommon in the hill country. And I put this in here to show you an example of a species that's reaching its eastern range limit. It's a species that's quite common in the western US, but just barely reaches the hill country. But we'll look for those species too, and that will, of course, give a real boost to the overall list for the trip. One of the most special, or I should say the most special species of the Texas hill country is the golden-cheeked warbler. It's a breeding endemic. It only nests on the Edwards Plateau entirely within Texas. It relies on mature juniper oak woodland, and it is endangered. It has declined, mainly due to habitat destruction, because there's more urbanization within the hill country. But fortunately, in several reserves, the species remains common, oftentimes nests in fairly high density in the right habitat, and it has this really wonderful high-pitched buzzy song, which makes it easier to locate. But the golden-cheeked warbler, probably one of the most wanted species during any trip to Texas in the springtime. And alongside the golden-cheeked warblers, there are some other warblers breeding, like the yellow-throated warbler. This is common in the southeastern US, but it's a canopy species, so not always easy to see in tall forest. Fortunately, the forest in the hill country is of lower stature, and we can oftentimes get wonderful eye-level views like this. A really beautiful warbler. Oftentimes they breed right around the cabins at Niels Lodge. And the other hill country specialty here is the black-capped vireo. It's not as range restricted as the golden-cheeked warbler. It occurs into Oklahoma and parts of northern Mexico, but most of the breeding territory for this bird is found within Texas. We'll make every effort to find it. It has suffered from brown-headed cowbird parasitism, so the population is endangered. It also has suffered from habitat destruction. It actually relies on secondary scrub oak, so very dense tangles, and you need fire to produce those. So in certain reserves, they have initiated controlled burns to improve the habitat for this species. It's quite a small and skulky vireo, really likes thickets, and it will move around in thickets, and oftentimes it takes a bit of patience. Will stand back and listen to a male sing. They have this wonderful jumbled song, and with luck, it will pop out into the open to give great views like this. There are many species of vireos here. Like I said, we have a total of 10 species possible on the tour. White-eyed vireos are quite common in tangles here, has a really snappy, loud song. And with a bit of pitching, we can oftentimes locate the species that will come out into the open. Yellow-throated vireo, this is an example of a species reaching its western range limit, common in the eastern US, but it breeds right alongside some of the other vireo species here in the hill country. And again, because the forest is lower, we can see this canopy bird low down many times. And also the Hutton's vireo. This is an example of a western species reaching its eastern range limit here. And these two species of vireos oftentimes breed side by side. It's difficult to say whether this species has expanded its range into the hill country or whether it's always been there and just has been overlooked, but it's fairly common in the right juniper woodlands. And with some luck, we'll see the stunning canyon wrens. Has a wonderful loud song, really relies on cliff faces and canyon walls, using that long bill to probe among crevices for spiders and insects. It's not terribly common on this tour, but we have 1 or 2 spots where we hope to see it. And in the hill country, we can also find some subtropical species that just barely cross the Rio Grande into Texas, have a very limited range within the ABA area. And one of these is the white-tipped duff. This species is pretty widespread in Central and South America, but limited to Texas in the ABA area. And it's the only leptotilla duff regularly in North America, or in the ABA area, I should say. And it's expanding its range slowly north, but we'll have good chances of seeing this bird at Lost Maple State Park, for example. And we, of course, when we're in the hill country, we'll keep an eye to the sky to search among the many turkey vultures, see whether we can pick out a zone-tailed hawk. It's uncommon in this part of Texas, but we always pay close attention. It's believed that this bird mimics turkey vultures to be able to approach its potential prey closer. It feeds on birds, reptiles, and mammals. And it makes a pretty good look-alike of a turkey vulture, but it's smaller, has a slightly different flight style, and hopefully we'll pick one out among the flocks of turkey vultures moving through. One of the true natural history spectacles and highlights of the hill country must be the Rio Frio Bat Cave. This is really something you have to see to believe. It's the second largest concentration of bats on the planet, and up to 10 million Brazilian free-tailed bats roost in this cave. The largest concentration of bats on the planet actually also occurs in Texas. It's called Bracken Cave. It's a bit north of here. It can have up to 15 million of bats. But Bracken Cave is much more closed off to the public and much more difficult to access. But Rio Frio Bat Cave is very accessible. And it's just incredible because the actual cave opening must be no more than 4 by 8 meters, so relatively small. And you just have these columns of bats streaming out. It usually starts a bit before sunset and continues well into the morning hours as these bats are moving to their feeding grounds. Here you can see a slightly closer image of the Brazilian free-tailed bats flying out. They just fly out in these streams by the thousands coming right overhead. You can hear their wings beating. Occasionally a bat will even drop to the ground, and we have a local guide there that will take care of any of those bats, but it's just a spectacle to see. And of course, so many bats will attract predators. Quite famously, red-tailed hawks are the most common raptor that move in when the bats are moving out, and they'll be catching these on the wing and eating them on the wing. I've also seen Swainsons hawks, Cooper's hawks, and Harris's hawks, peregrine falcons, and great horned owls go after the bats. Last time I was there, even a crested caracara tried to move in to catch one, but caracaras are usually not as agile as some of the other raptors. You can see another close-up of the red-tailed hawk going after one of the Brazilian free-tailed bats. And I think that David Attenborough's Life of Birds filmed some of the scenes here when they showed the red-tailed hawks hunting bats. And since we're already out after dark, we might as well do a little bit of owling, and we can oftentimes find an eastern screech owl. Quite well known for being dimorphic. They occur in gray morphs like this one and in rufous morphs. We will also spend the morning along the Nueces River. You can see some of the wonderful karst topography there. This place is called Chalk Bluff. Has a lot of diverse habitats in a small area, riparian forest, grassland, and some thorn scrub. And this is the best chance for us to see the ring kingfisher, another species that's widespread in Central and South America, just barely comes into Texas, mainly along the Rio Grande, but we do have chances of seeing it along the Nueces River here. Sometimes takes a bit of patience to wait for one to fly in. And the thickets here are full of yellow-breasted chats, a very unique species, used to be considered a wood warbler, but it has a much larger bill, much larger size, really bizarre calls and songs. And it does this display flight. It looks like an oversized moth as it flies up, flapping its wings really slowly and dropping back down, giving it strange calls. And it's now, and I think rightly so, placed into its own monotypic family, Icteriidae. So maybe more aligned with blackbirds, but it is a completely unique species and fortunately quite common here. And the males will be sitting up, singing and displaying. We can add to our vireo list here, the Bell's vireo, another really snappy, fast-paced, distinctive song, and with some patience, they will come out of their tangles and show well. And another subtropical South Texas specialty here, the Olive Sparrow. Quite secretive most times of the year, feeding underneath bushes, but during the spring, the males will sit up like this and sing their bouncing ball song. And another specialty here is the long-billed thresher. This is a species actually endemic to northeast Mexico and southern Texas, so pretty range restricted, but fairly common in the mesquite thickets here. And again, since it's spring, they will be sitting up and singing out in the open like this, not only leading to awesome observations, but also great photographic opportunities. And this is the area where we reach the edge of the Chihuahuan Desert, and many desert species occur here that we won't see anywhere else on the tour, including the wonderful cactus wren, quite a large and gregarious wren. And you can see perched on its favorite habitat there. It's really well adapted to the desert. It can get all its fluids from its food, including insects or cactus fruit. The black-throated sparrow is also a desert specialty that's fairly common in this area here. Again, just on the eastern edge of its range. Really wonderful, distinctive sparrow with a memorable song. And the verdin, we'll definitely make every effort to see this species. It's a very small species, could be easily overlooked, except it has a loud call and builds a fairly obvious bulbous nest. And this is the only member of the family Remisidae, which are the penduline tits. It's the only member of that family in the New World. So very unique in terms of its lineage. There are about 10 species of penduline tits that occur in Africa and Eurasia, but the verdin is the only representative of that family in this part of the world. So we'll definitely make sure we'll get good views of this. It's a quite agile, acrobatic species. And here we can also see the Pyrrholoxia. This is the arid habitat counterpart of the northern cardinal. Has a very similar call and song. Oftentimes the two species occur side by side, but this is also the best chance for us to see the unique Pyrrholoxia here. And the greater roadrunner. This is actually widespread throughout Texas, but it's pretty difficult to see in the dense habitats further east. So in this open desert scrub, we'll get the best views. It's a voracious predator, feeds on scorpions, snakes, lizards, small mammals, small birds, and it's even been known to stake out hummingbird feeders where it will wait and jump up and capture hummingbirds in midair. But we should see one or two in this area. Then we move further south into the South Texas plains, and we'll visit the King Ranch for a full day. This is one of the largest ranches remaining in the US. It's still an active ranch. They produce a lot of cattle. They also have a lot of hunting leases, so they actively manage for game birds, for example. So northern bobwhite and wild turkeys are really easy to see there. We'll actually be looking for a couple specialties while we're here, and those include the Ferogenous Pygmial. This is a species that has a very limited range in the ABA area, only in South Texas and parts of Southeast Arizona. And the King Ranch supports the largest breeding population of this small diurnal owl. So we usually check one or two territories and hopefully can turn one up. Another specialty here is the southern beardless tyrannulet. The name is longer than the bird itself, a relatively drab flycatcher. Could be easily overlooked, but it has a very loud and distinctive song. And it's the only member of the subfamily Elaneinae in North America. So quite a unique species, and we'll make every effort to find it. Here you can see some more of the Texas coastal scenery, wonderful live oak forests with, again, beautiful display of wildflowers in the foreground. And in these live oak forests, we'll look for another specialty, the tropical parula. Tropical parula just reaches South Texas as a breeding species. And there are some areas in Texas where the northern and tropical parulas overlap, and it's known to hybridize. So every once in a while in the hill country, you see a bird that looks in between. But on the King Ranch, all the birds on territory are usually pure tropical parulas. So another specialty here. But it doesn't end there. The day on the King Ranch is really productive. We'll add to our flycatcher list with the range-restricted Couch's kingbird. And we can also find the look-alike tropical kingbird. This is slowly expanding its range in Texas too. And if you look at these two species, they look very similar, essentially identical, and very difficult to tell apart without voice. Fortunately, they each have very distinctive calls. And we have now found a resident, or I should say a territorial pair of tropical kingbirds on the King Ranch that we can add. And the green jay, one of the really stunning subtropical species here. Interestingly, in Texas, the green jay does not breed cooperatively, whereas in South America they do. And in South America, of course, it's the Inca jay, which is sometimes considered a species or subspecies. But here in Texas, we'll see this wonderful green jay. And the Audubon's oriole, another range-restricted species. It's actually on the Audubon's watch list. It's probably a threatened species. For an oriole, it's fairly quiet and furtive, so it usually moves around in pairs through the subcanopy. Doesn't call that much, but on the King Ranch, we have good chances to maybe turn up a pair or two. A very distinctive and stunning species. The King Ranch is also an excellent place to see raptors. And on our approach to the King Ranch, we'll actually go through an area called the Raptor Alley, which has huge numbers of Harris's hawks, for example. This species is the only known raptor or bird to hunt in coordinated family groups. So meaning one or two individuals may flush out prey while another bird waits in ambush to capture the prey, like rabbits, for example. This is, of course, well known among mammals like wolf packs and lion prides, but it's unknown in birds except for the Harris's hawk, so a really unique species. We'll look up to the sky and we'll probably come across some white-tailed hawks, really stunning large buteo that's fairly common in South Texas. And Swainson's hawks will be moving through. Some of them will be breeding in Texas, and most others will continue north to prairies of Canada, for example. And they undergo one of the longest migrations of any raptor in the Western Hemisphere, about 10,000 kilometers from Canada all the way to the Pampas region of Argentina. Only the Arctic peregrine falcon migrates further than that in the New World. Interestingly, on their wintering grounds, they mainly feed on grasshoppers. So they collect in big groups, big flocks, and take advantage of that prey. In the summer, they mainly feed on mammals and birds. And the crested caracara, this is another subtropical species. It's really expanding its range. For example, 20 years ago, it was rare around the Houston area, and now it's regular. So we'll see plenty of those along the roadsides. With great luck, we might still find a Sprague's pipit. This is a wintering species on the King Ranch. Most of them will have left to their breeding grounds on the prairies of Canada and the northern US. But oftentimes we can still find one or two individuals lingering. It's endemic to the North American grasslands, so real specialty. And quite well camouflaged, creeps around through the grass, but once you find one, they're usually pretty confiding, allowing great views and some good photo opportunities. So that's one of the other major targets during our visit on the King Ranch. In the same grasslands, we can find botherized sparrows, another specialty of South Texas and South Arizona. And oftentimes the botherized sparrow will nest right alongside the very similar looking cassin sparrows. Fortunately, both species have really distinctive songs, so it's always a joy to stand out in the grasslands and to directly hear both species on either end of the grasslands and be able to compare those. And if we're really lucky, we'll keep an eye to the ground, we may find a Texas horned lizard. This species has unfortunately declined dramatically, likely due to the introduction of non-native fire ants. But on some of these large ranches in South Texas, you can still find them occasionally. So we'll keep an eye out for this unique lizard species. After we visit the King Ranch, we'll spend another night in Kingsville, and then we drive up to the upper Texas coast. Looks like a longer drive, but we'll be making many stops along the way to look for migrants and other water-associated birds. One of the specialties we look for along the way is the Aplomado Falcon. This is a species that was extirpated from Texas, but during the past 2 decades, there have been successful reintroduction efforts. You can see this bird is banded, for example, and it's now has bred in the wild for several years. So the population is slowly growing. It's still pretty limited and localized, but the population is on an upswing, and we now have great chances to see it. Once we reach the upper Texas coast, we'll set up for a 4-night stay, depending on the tour, and we'll really have lots and plenty of time to really enjoy this phenomenal spring migration. So one of the most interesting features of this migration is the Trans-Gulf route. So as birds are funneling up from their wintering grounds in South and Central America, they will actually move to the Yucatan Peninsula, and many species will stage here, and then they'll take a direct flight across the Gulf of Mexico instead of going the circumgulf route. So this is an amazing feat of endurance that these birds are accomplished. Even ruby-throated hummingbirds take this route. So just imagine a tiny hummingbird flying nonstop, and this flight takes between 16 and 20 hours, really depending on the weather conditions. And so they leave the Yucatan Peninsula about 30 minutes after sunset. They usually reach the Texas coast in the late afternoon, early evening, depending on if they encountered any rain or any north winds. If there is adverse weather, like rain or north winds or cold front, you get conditions for a fallout. So what that means is you have large numbers of migrants arriving on the coast, relatively depleted in terms of fat stores, and they'll drop into these migrant traps, basically the first suitable habitat that they can find. If these conditions persist for 2 or 3 nights or days, you really get this huge buildup of neotropical migrants. I've seen fallouts where I've had 10 species of wood warblers, maybe 30 individuals in one single tree. And the birds oftentimes will feed right out in the open. They're very confiding. For birders, fallouts are great. Of course, remember, for birds, it makes the migration much more difficult. So it's always a mixed blessing. For the birds, we always hope that they have good conditions, of course, to migrate north. Even in good conditions, we still see a large variety of migrants passing through these coastal areas. Some species take a circumgulf route. Nashville warblers, for example, they will actually fly around the Gulf. Even individuals of the same species, if they are in poor condition for some reason, they sometimes take a circumgulf route versus the transgulf. They've shown that in wood thrushes, for example. There are so many birds coming across the Gulf arriving on the Texas coast that they show up on weather radar. Here you can see birds dropping down. These red clusters and yellow clusters are concentrations of birds and not actual rain. And we're talking millions of birds per mile during the peak spring migration. One of the migrant hotspots we'll spend quite a bit of time at is High Island. It's quite famous and well known. It's actually not an island at all. What it is, it's a salt dome. So the part where the town and the forest is slightly higher, 4 to 5 feet higher in elevation than the surrounding marshes. So it allows for hardwood forests to grow. You can see High Island right in the middle here, this dark spot. There's a small town there, and it's surrounded and interspersed by reserves and preserves to protect this important stopover habitat for neotropical migrants. Everything else you see in the surroundings here are basically coastal marshes. Great for water birds, but not ideal for warblers. So as these warblers are coming off the Gulf, oftentimes they're coming in quite low, right above the waves. This is one of the first suitable patches of habitat they see, and they'll spend time there. Another migrant trap that's quite famous is Sabine Woods. It's one of my personal favorites. Again, it's just this little strip of forest right in the middle here, this dark area. And this is a great spot for migrating thrushes, has quite an open understory with a lot of leaf litter. It's also a good spot to see some warblers that have a more easterly route, like black-throated blue warbler or Cape May warbler. And again, everything you see around it are coastal marshes, and you can see the Gulf Coast right here. So here our group is entering High Island, and you can see some of the wonderful large trees that grow here, very dense understory that it's really conducive to providing habitat for these warblers. And on a good day, it's not uncommon to record more than 30 species of migrating warblers just in this one location. It's quite incredible. And of course, add to that buntings, orioles, grosbeaks, tanagers, thrushes, vireos, and everything in between. So you get very busy and exciting birding days here. Some of the more regular warbler species that move through include the black-throated green warbler. The stunning American redstart can be quite common. In the understory, just off the ground, we'll oftentimes see hooded warblers foraging. Then bay-breasted warblers, they usually stick more to the canopy. And then again on the ground, we'll look for the secretive Kentucky warbler. Chestnut-sided warblers can be fairly common at mid-levels. And if there are any swampy areas around, prothonotary warblers prefer those areas. Also on the ground, ovenbirds will be moving through the leaf litter. And then in lower numbers, but regular, are the worm-eating warblers. They specialize on the clusters of dead leaves. We oftentimes see them in the dense yaupon moving through. And black and white warblers are common. And this time of year, most of the water thrushes moving through will be northern water thrushes. Louisiana water thrushes migrate earlier, but at this point we should have seen Louisiana water thrush on its breeding ground in the hill country. So these are just basically some of the more common warblers. And to that, we can add some of the slightly less common species that occur in lower numbers, like the wonderful magnolia warbler. And like I said, Louisiana water thrushes will be uncommon, but occasionally you still get an individual moving through. Canada warblers occur in low numbers. Cape May warblers, this is a species that winters mainly in the West Indies. So it takes a more easterly route through Florida, for example, but we usually see 1 or 2 during migration. Mourning warblers, we'll definitely keep an ear and eye out for those. It's more common as a fall migrant in Texas, but in the spring we can oftentimes find 1 or 2 individuals. Black-throated blue warblers, this is really quite uncommon in Texas because it does move further east. And then one of the most wanted species here is the Swainsons Warbler, one of the drabber species of woodland warblers that we can see in Texas, but it's really high on everybody's wish list. And if we don't see this species during migration, we will definitely see it on its breeding grounds in the Piney Woods. Same for this guy right here, the prairie warbler. Uncommon during migration, but we will see it on its breeding grounds in the Piney Woods. In addition to the warblers, you also have cuckoos moving through, most commonly yellow-billed cuckoo. And of course, our cuckoos are not nest parasites, but they can occasionally parasitize nests anyway. They build their own nests, they tend their own young, but occasionally a cuckoo will, yellow-billed cuckoo will lay an egg in another species' nest. And then much less common than the yellow-billed cuckoo is the black-billed cuckoo. Just occurs in much lower numbers and always a treat to see during migration or anywhere. So this individual right here set up shop in its favorite food, tent caterpillars. This was at High Island a few years ago, and the bird literally sat in this cluster of tent caterpillars all day, munching away and allowing for great photographic opportunities. So some of these birds, once they come across the Gulf, they really spend several hours or days sometimes refueling, occasionally setting up really small territories within these migrant traps, making them reliable to see. Flycatchers will still be, we are a bit early for flycatchers. Most of them will be moving through later in May, but we'll definitely see some eastern wood peewees. These will be common. And the earliest Empidonex to arrive in Texas is the Acadian flycatcher. But we'll also see a variety of other Empidonex flycatchers like least, maybe willow and alder. But the bulk of the flycatchers move through slightly later after most of the warblers have passed through. And of course, thrushes. 5 species of thrushes are possible here, including the wood thrush. This is a species that has declined quite a bit due to forest fragmentation, known for its wonderful song, and they will actually, oftentimes the thrushes will be singing already in these migrant traps, which is really enjoyable as you're walking through these narrow paths. You hear wood thrushes, Swainsons, gray-cheeked. The most common Catharus thrush is the Swainsons thrush, and we carefully search through these to look for gray-cheeked thrush, vireo, and occasionally we even still find a hermit thrush, which is a very early migrant. Most of them will have left Texas by April, but we usually get 1 or 2 hermit thrushes also. Of course, tanagers. These really light up the trees. You can get flocks of scarlet tanagers. I've seen bare trees just littered with tanagers and orioles. Literally looks like a Christmas tree. Summer tanagers are well known for feeding on bees and wasps. Some of the other larger colorful birds include the orioles. Baltimore orioles sometimes stream through in flocks. You can see them arriving as they come across the Gulf and drop into these migrant traps. Orchard orioles also occur in large numbers. Buntings, on certain days where I've seen fallouts, I've seen entire lawns just covered in flocks of indigo buntings, really adding a lot of color to the Texas spring. And in lower numbers, we can see the stunning blue grosbeak, which also moves through. And if we don't see it here, they also breed in the Piney Woods. Of course, it's not just passerines that move through and migrate, also raptors and everything else, and shorebirds and nighthawks. There'll be common nighthawks will be moving through during the day. Oftentimes we can find them on a roost. Even lesser nighthawks comes through here regularly. And mammals, we always keep an eye out for mammals. And the upper Texas coast has been somewhat reliable for bobcats, so I hope we can add that to our list of sightings. I've seen them there several dozen times. From the migrant traps, we move to the coastal prairies, a very productive habitat for sparrows and shorebirds. Here we will see the eastern meadowlark. They'll be singing and sitting up on fence posts, displaying. And also the dickcissel. They will have just returned from their wintering grounds in South America. They occur in big flocks in Venezuela, for example. They reach the coastal prairies where they'll sit up and they'll give their namesake song. Really wonderful species. And we'll also look very carefully in these grasslands for some wintering species that are still here, like the Lecant Sparrow. These will leave. They move to the prairies of Canada and the northern US, but during April, we can usually find one or two still on its wintering grounds. And we'll definitely find the Nelson Sparrow. Also a migrant, it will move north to the same areas as the Lecant Sparrow, but it seems to migrate later than the Lecant Sparrow, and we can oftentimes find this bird still in good numbers. It winters in salt marshes. And in the same habitat, we'll be looking for the resident seaside sparrow. Really unique sparrow, well adapted to its habitat. You can see that long bill, it feeds on mudflats in between this marshy vegetation. Really skulky most time of the year, but in the spring, the males will hitch up onto some vegetation like this and sing their song, and they're much easier to see. And this subspecies right here is nearly restricted to Texas. And marsh wrens will be singing at full tilt. Quite interesting species. The western and eastern populations are very different in terms of song repertoire and songs, so they may represent two different species. We'll also move along the Bolivar Peninsula and Anahuac National Wildlife Refuge, one of the most birdy areas in the US. Of course, I'm a bit biased, but it's tons of waterfowl, shorebirds, and other water birds, like the fulvous whistling duck, which has expanded into rice growing areas in Texas. The wonderful black-bellied whistling duck is a resident here, quite comical for their ability to perch on telephone wires. And then another waterfowl specialty here is the mottled duck, which breeds along the Gulf Coast. It's a kind of a mallard look-alike, and it actually will hybridize with feral mallards, which threatens this species. We also see a number of other ducks that are still on their wintering grounds. It's a great place for herons and egrets, like the wonderful snowy egret, which was near extinction at the beginning of the 20th century due to the plume trade. Of course, has rebounded well now. The tricolored heron, species that prefers to be more solitary compared to other egrets and herons. And the reddish egret, real specialty here, quite common on the Texas coast, more so than in many other parts of its range, occurs in two distinct morphs, like this dark morph here, and a completely white morph too. Black-crowned night herons are common. They'll occur right alongside the yellow-crowned night herons, often roosting near each other. And the wonderful least bittern is common in the marshy areas here, especially at Anahuac National Wildlife Refuge. It's a very small heron. You can see its curved claws there that it uses to clamber through the reeds. And with luck, we'll also see American bittern still on its wintering grounds. And the amazing Roseate Spoonbill. Some people call this the Texas flamingo. It's the only spoonbill in the world that has this pink coloration in its plumage, and also the only one that has an unfeathered head. We'll actually be visiting an active rookery of herons and egrets and spoonbills, and these will be either displaying, nest building, or some of them will already be incubating. And the photo opportunities are fantastic as we're watching these birds going back and forth from their nests. Great place for rails on the upper Texas coast, like the colorful purple gallinule, but also more secretive species will look for king rail. Closer to the coast, we'll look for clapper rails. Soras will be migrating through in good numbers. Definitely see these occasionally out in the open like that. We'll also look for Virginia rail, and we will also look for black rail, although seeing one will require a lot of luck. Shorebirds, like I said, 35 species of shorebirds can be found on this itinerary, including the American avocet, the only avocet with a distinct alternate plumage in the world with this rufous neck and head. The loud and noisy and territorial black-necked stilt will be present. Sometimes we can see black-bellied plovers in their full breeding fineries as they're on their way to their high Arctic breeding grounds. Most of the time they're still plain, and in other parts of the world they're of course known as the gray plover. Bolivar Flats is a great place to catch up with all the small plovers in the United States, including the Wilson's plover, which nests here and uses their large bill to mainly feed on crustaceans. And this will really serve as a great place to study these shorebirds and compare them side by side. The endangered piping plover is fortunately still common as a wintering bird and migrant on the Texas coast. And so is the small snowy plover. And like I said, many of these will be feeding next to each other, so you can really see and study the differences. And semi-palmated plovers are very common as they are migrating towards the Arctic. We will also explore some drier habitats for shorebirds. Oftentimes the best place to look are turf farms, which are numerous along the Texas coast, and they will host migrating upland sandpipers. This shorebird really avoids wetlands. It breeds on dry prairies, winters on pampas grasslands, and even during migration usually sticks to drier grassy areas. Very dove-like head and long tail. One of the other real specialties we look for is the buff-breasted sandpiper. Texas is a great place to see this rare species during migration. I've even seen flocks large enough, 60 to 80 birds, where some individuals were doing their display. They raise their underwings, which are gleaming white underneath, and puff up their chest. So that saves you a trip to the Arctic, where they usually do that on their breeding grounds. Many other small sandpipers, like the least sandpiper, the smallest one in North America. Western sandpipers, incredibly, they have a large world population, 3.5 million birds, and almost all of them breed in Western Alaska and move through in big numbers in Texas. The solitary sandpiper, known for its unique behavior of nesting in trees. It uses the abandoned nests of jays and other passerines, fairly common, usually singly, of course, in freshwater wetlands. And white-rumped sandpipers will pass through in good numbers. And this is really a migration champion moving all the way from southern South America to the high Arctic. And this time of year, we'll see good numbers of them in Texas, alongside the very similar Baird sandpiper. We'll move to the beaches and sand flats and mud flats, and here we can see up to 8 species of terns, including the large royal tern, the smallest of them all, the least tern, and then every size class in between, and the wonderful black skimmer, one of 4 species of skimmers in the world with that elongated lower mandible. They use that to skim through the water, and then the upper mandible snaps shut if they detect any prey. So just to show you the map one last time here, remember where we are. We are on the upper coast, just east of Houston, and then we'll move up into the Piney Woods to finish the tour. This is a wonderful, very diverse habitat. Here you can see stands of loblolly pine. Traditionally, this would have been longleaf pine. Most of that has been cut, unfortunately, but some of the species have adapted to this new pine species. You can see a fairly open understory. This is due to prescribed burns. This is active habitat management for some endangered species. And the most endangered of them all is the Redcocated Woodpecker. This is a very unique woodpecker endemic to southeastern US. It breeds cooperatively, which is uncommon, so it breeds in family groups. It only excavates cavities in live trees, which is also very unique for woodpecker species. And those trees have to be infected with red heart fungus to soften up the inside so the woodpecker can actually get in there and excavate a nest. And these live trees exude sap around the cavity opening, which deters predators like rat snakes. So they have a really very specific habitat requirements. In addition, they need this open understory that you can see here. So we'll visit 1 or 2 family clusters to see this unique woodpecker. Another species that has benefited from these prescribed burns and this habitat management is the wonderful Buckman Sparrow. Very secretive sparrow with a wonderful song. And they have this amazing ability. They'll sing a really quiet song, and it sounds like it's 50 meters ahead of us, and you scan, and in reality, the bird is sitting right at your feet, just has this wonderful quiet version of its song. So another species we'll seek out here. And the brown-headed nuthatch, one of only 2 species of nuthatches known to breed cooperatively. If we didn't see the Swainsons Warbler during migration, we have a good chance of seeing it here. In the right habitat, it's actually quite a common breeding species. So we'll make sure we'll get good views of this unique warbler here and also some photo opportunities. Swallow-tailed kites occur in low numbers in East Texas, so we'll see this. They nest here, feed in the canopy, feeding on reptiles, lizards, and birds. And a great variety of woodpeckers occurs here. We can see downy, pileated, maybe hairy woodpeckers with some luck. Even northern flickers breed here. And the most stunning of them all, the redheaded woodpecker, well known for its ability to fly after insects and do sallying. And we'll also do a bit of night birding here. We can look for chuckwolves, widows, great horned owl, and the barred owls are fairly common here and will be vocal this time of year. And of course, let's not forget the amphibians. When we're out at night, we can also look for a variety of tree frogs. So this was a bit of a whirlwind tour of Texas. Lots to talk about, lots of bird species to see. I do want to briefly mention, we have 3 tours coming up in April into the beginning of May. We have a 12-day tour followed by 2 shorter tours, one is 5 days focusing on the upper coast. The other one is also 5 days focusing on the hill country. And each of these tours still have limited space available. So contact us if you're interested. That's it for now. Really appreciate your time. Thank you for joining.
Oh, thank you so much, Stephan. What an amazing virtual tour. And before I hand over to Keith and Stephan for Q&A, because there's some great questions in the Q&A box, the webinars in the series are being offered free of charge. Should you, however, wish to donate towards our tour leaders and staff, our GoFundMe donation link has been placed into your chat box. Thanks. Over to you guys.
Thank you, Nikki.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Nikki. Brilliant, Stephan. Absolutely brilliant. Just a quick one. George has actually just got back. He actually just flew back into the US last night from that trip out to Colombia. So he's just been exploring a bunch of. Yeah. Just got back. So there'll be a very fresh topic with a bunch of fresh photos. And yeah, as Nikki said, yeah, join George. That's in 2 weeks' time for that Colombia presentation that he'll be doing, featuring Itinerary and a bunch of the Llanos and what have you in that area of Colombia. So yeah, let's dive in. There's some fantastic questions that have come through, Stephan.
Awesome.
Firstly, I guess quite an easy one to start off with. Someone was just asking, what does the ABA mean, the ABA region, when you mentioned that?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I should have clarified that. So basically, it's the American Birding Association has designated a geographic area that's a listing area, basically, which includes the United States, including Hawaii now, which was recently added, and all of Canada, and of course about 200 miles out of the coast. So it's a listing region, so it's a geographic area, and people try to maximize their list within that area. You know, it could be others do state lists, which is just Texas, and so on. So South Texas is quite well known for hosting many species of birds that just spill across the border, across the Rio Grande from Mexico. And they're within the ABA area, within the US, that's the only place to find them. That's why I mentioned the ABA area so often, yeah.
Absolutely. Great, thanks, Stephan. Clearing that one up. Another question here. So I live in El Paso, and my question is concerning the extended and worsening drought here in West Texas. Are these dry conditions causing permanent changes in migration patterns?
Okay, yeah, no, I actually just got that email, and I was going to answer that email. So no, I'm really glad we're able to talk about that now. Makes it a bit easier. Yeah. So droughts can always be difficult for birds in terms of their breeding attempts. Occasionally, birds might skip a breeding attempt for the year if it's a really bad drought and they're not in good enough condition or can't find enough food. But birds are quite incredible at adapting too. For example, in 2011, we had a major drought in Texas, and during the winter particularly, and many Western species moved east. So they showed up in the Houston area, for example, and they wintered there. They found wetter conditions, and then they survived the winter. They did fairly well there, I assume, and then they moved back to their range. So birds have the ability to adapt. So I'm not predicting a huge amount of changes in populations, but migration patterns could change. Birds could move further east, for example, avoiding the really stricken or most dry areas during this particular year.
Excellent. Thanks, Stephan. Elise is asking, what are the chances for eastern whippoorwill?
Eastern whippoorwill? Okay.
Yeah.
The chances are, I would say, fairly good. Usually if we find eastern whippoorwill, it's in one of the migrant traps, and it will be a roosting bird during the day. The other chance we have is we do an evening outing in the Piney Woods where we look for chuckwill's widows. And oftentimes Eastern whippoorwills, they don't breed in Texas, they move further north, but they will be calling at night during migration. So we always listen for them. But there is a chance in the migrant traps for sure.
Excellent. Just before we get into some more questions, Tracy's just written through here, says, a wonderful presentation with your great photographs. It brings back memories of doing this trip with you 2 years ago. I hope you and Claudia are doing well.
We are. Thank you. Thank you. And hopefully see you on a tour soon.
Lovely. Right, Darren's asking, do you see hummingbirds on the Texas tour?
Yeah, that's a really good question. When I actually finished up this presentation, I realized, oh, I didn't put any hummingbirds in here. And it is a limited number, but we do see lots of ruby-throated hummingbirds on the upper Texas coast. They migrate through. Sometimes we see dozens of individuals. In the hill country, we'll see black-chinned hummingbirds, which are quite common there. And then on the King Ranch, we'll make a special effort for buff-bellied hummingbird, which is a South Texas specialty, and we can usually find it there. So yeah, we usually end up with a trip list of 3 species of hummingbirds. Very rarely we might catch up with a Western species that moves through, like an Anna's hummingbird or something.
Mm-hmm. Nice, nice. Yeah, hummer's always special.
Yeah, yeah, buff-bellied particularly. That's a fantastic large hummer.
Absolutely. Another question just about High Island and Sabine Woods. Just asking, what's the best time of the year to visit those spots to see the spring migrants?
So yeah, that's the migration really, for many folks would say it peaks mid-April. The reason I like to go a little bit later in April is because the southern warblers that arrive earlier, they will arrive in Texas, and essentially all of them will breed in Texas. So you can get them on their nesting grounds. And by going a little bit later, like towards the end of April, you get a lot of the later migrants that are moving through that are on their way to the Canadian boreal forest, for example. And then you can just if you miss any of the southern breeders, you can just make a quick jaunt of about an hour and a half, 2 hours into the Piney Woods and see things like hooded warbler, Swainsons Warbler, prairie, Louisiana water thrush, Kentucky warbler. You can see them all on their nesting grounds. So I really prefer a bit later in April. So if anybody decides, wants to visit the Texas coast, I would say the last week in April is really one of the best. And I've even had great migration all the way into the second week of May, somewhat weather dependent.
Yeah, fantastic time of the year. I mean, I've only been there the once, as I mentioned to you earlier, Stephan, but my trip was that sort of last week of April into the early part of May, and it really was extraordinary.
The only thing I might add, I remember now, it's if you're really after, for example, Cerulean Warbler, they come through more in the middle of April. We still get them on our tours, but let's say you would want to target this one particular migrant. Cerulean is a little bit of an earlier migrant, and they don't breed in Texas, but usually get 1 or 2 individuals still towards the end of April.
Excellent. Judith says, what a great talk, thoroughly enjoyed it. Just a question about Big Bend. Does RJ run a tour here, and what would be the best time of the year to try and visit Big Bend? Yeah,
well, we definitely need to add an extension. That would work best as an extension, either from the hill country or from the upper Texas coast, and it's definitely doable. Any time in April would be good. Basically, you do have a bigger window there. One of the specialties there is the Colima Warbler, which requires a bit of a hike, and that already arrives by the end of March. So anywhere within April, you'll be able to see them. Mexican whippoorwill, elf owl, some of the other specialties out there will all be present in April, and you still get a nice slice of migration too. It's a slower migration, but it's mostly Western warblers. So yeah, it's wide open. I wouldn't go into May mainly because of temperatures. So because it can get a bit steamy down there. So in the desert, but anytime in April would be great.
Fantastic. Alice is just asking about some of the buses and what have you, vehicles that we use at the moment. And,
so that's a good question. So we use 15 passenger vans, but we only put 7 participants and 1 driver. Of course, you always need a driver, but we put 7 participants in these vans. So everybody ends up with it's a bench seat that's designed for 3 people, and only 2 folks are in each of the bench seats. So you have a completely open, free middle seat. If we have a number of participants, like let's say 10 people, what we do is we'll have 1 van, and then we'll have 1 large SUV, where you essentially end up with the same setup. You'll have a large bench seat in the SUV, of course, a passenger seat and a driver. So there's plenty of room for luggage, your personal gear, and also for some distancing.
Yeah, excellent. Just on that sort of note as well, Ricky's just asking, and also says, great presentation, thanks, and also an excellent brush up for the spring migration ID. So thanks for that, Ricky. But yeah, Ricky's also just saying, the birds are great, of course, but how many people are we likely to see on this trip? What are sort of numbers of birders typically around at the sites visited?
Yeah, that's a very good question also. I tend to schedule, it depends on weather too, but at High Island, for example, I tend to try to go there during a weekday, which lowers the number of people. And High Island is actually a sizable place. Most people go to the main sites, Boy Scout Woods and so on, but there are many other pockets of really good habitat that we know of that we can go to and see the similar or more birds even without having to join a crowd, for example. All the other places are pretty empty. It's Texas really is a big place. I do a hike at Lost Maples, for example. It's a very short hike about 2 kilometers, wonderful habitat, and you don't see any other birders. And the King Ranch we have to ourselves, so in general, pretty empty. And High Island, I would plan around that just to make sure I'm not there on a weekend necessarily.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, as I say, big, wide open spaces.
Yeah.
Very good. All right. So Mary is from Florida, and she's saying out that side, they mostly go looking for red-cockaded woodpecker at dawn when they leave their colonies. Is that true in Texas as well?
Yeah, so we get there before. Yeah, no, that's a very good point. We get there before sunrise, so or at sunrise. So what you do is you get there very early. They have these nesting cavities that they use for not just for nesting but also for roosting. And sometimes the family group is kind of scattered into different cavities. And you'll set up the scope and you'll watch for it to pop out its head right at sunrise. But even afterwards, even after sunrise, we can oftentimes find the family group foraging. And sometimes you put up a scope on the nesting cavity and a flying squirrel looks out at you. So it really depends. But no, definitely dawn is the best time because they do disperse and they tend to feed in the canopy on thinner branches. And they're fairly quiet for a woodpecker. So we'll get them at dawn.
Nice. Excellent strategy. Vegan food, is that readily available out in Texas?
Yeah, we can definitely accommodate any food type. Even though we may visit let's say a local barbecue place, we'll make sure that there's an option that somebody who prefers vegan has a solid meal. That we've always been able to accommodate that.
Excellent. And then another one quickly. So Charles is just saying here, you mentioned that several species are expanding their range. As a child in the hill country, he remembers just seeing mourning doves, but now white-winged doves are common. How much of the species range expansion do you attribute to climate change, and how much due to other factors?
Ooh, that's a tough question. Probably, I would say a big chunk of it can be associated with increasing temperatures. So meaning that these subtropical species are just able to be resident further and further north. For example, olive sparrow and white-tipped doves have really expanded. In terms of the white-winged dove, they have expanded so rapidly, the species may itself be adapting to be able to tolerate lower temperatures and also be able to take advantage of other food sources. Like the Eurasian colored dove, for example, the reason they're able to survive in such numbers is because they're around grain elevators. They readily come to bird feeders. I'm in Wyoming right now. We just had a snowstorm and I got 20 Eurasian colored doves in the yard, all mobbing the feeder. So it's a combination of additional food sources provided and birds adapting to those and increasing temperatures.
Thanks for that, Stephan. Yeah, big chunky piece that you can really get stuck into.
That's a complicated question, but in coming years we'll probably get more answers.
Yeah, absolutely. Niels Lodge, can you describe that lodge just a little bit? Some folks keen to know.
It's a really unique place. So it's you have many scattered cabins throughout the habitat right along the Rio Frio River. The Rio Frio River is one of the beautiful hill country rivers. You got to imagine most of the hill country rivers are spring fed, so they're crystal clear and they run across this limestone bottom. So it's just an absolutely stunning water. And you have these beautiful bald cypress growing along it, a few canyon walls. And the lodge itself is mainly composed of cabins that are scattered throughout the area. Each cabin is quite interesting. They're all large. So we rent cabins for singles or doubles, for couples, but could end up with a cabin that has 5 bedrooms, for example. So the way we do it is you just pick whatever bedroom suits you the most. Many of them even have their own kitchen, but all of them have their own porch and veranda. We do spend some downtime there because you can just bird the property and enjoy the habitat there. So it's a really unique experience. And then we usually eat at their restaurant on the property there, which is set right alongside the Rio Frio. They have a big porch where we can sit outside and overlook the habitat. So really a highlight for most people to stay there. And one of the few places in Texas that you could consider a birding lodge. You know, they have hummingbird feeders, other bird feeders. You know, there aren't that many lodges set up in Texas for birders.
That sounds like a very, very special place. Certainly very memorable.
Any
chances for seeing brown jay on the
brown jay? Oh, no, they have disappeared, unfortunately. So there was a very small population of brown jays resident in the Salinenio area, right along the Rio Grande. They would actually move back and forth across the river between the US and Mexico and visit a feeder regularly. And I believe it was 9 or 8 years ago that the last one was seen. The problem is on the Mexican side, there's no habitat connectivity anymore. So it's very unlikely that brown jays will recolonize the United States. So if you didn't see that, I fortunately got to see them a few times about a decade ago, but currently there are no brown jays in the US.
Sure.
At least not wild ones. Yeah.
Right. Just a couple more questions here. Starting to get to the end, but yeah, a few more to go. Can you describe or define migrant trap, which you used a couple of times?
Okay, cool. No, that is a really good question too. I'm really glad these are coming up and giving me the chance to elaborate a little bit. So basically, a migrant trap is a patch of suitable habitat, usually within an area of unsuitable habitat that concentrates migrants. So in High Island, for example, real simple, you have a woodlot of live oaks that's only growing there because the ground is slightly higher in elevation. And surrounding all that area, you either have the Gulf itself, ocean, or salt marshes. And as these neotropical migrants are coming across and they're reaching land and they need to rest and refuel, they look for suitable habitat. And they all funnel basically into the woodlots of High Island, and they occur there at extremely high concentrations for short periods of time. They refuel if they're in good shape, they take off that same evening, or they may linger for a few days. But it basically allows you to see, you know, it's instead of seeing 1 or 2 American redstarts, you'll see 60 in the morning. And it's just these very high concentrations. And these are critically important stopover habitats for neotropical migrants. That's why many chunks like that, many woodlots are protected either by Audubon or the Texas Ornithological Society. So that is basically refers to a migrant trap. It just concentrates, and a trap kind of sounds like has a negative connotation to it, but not in this case. It just basically, it should be more called a migrant attraction area or stopover site. So then nothing is getting trapped, nobody's getting trapped. It's just that's where they stop over in high concentrations. And you can literally stand in a spot there and you'll have a Cerulean Warbler feeding at eye level next to you, and behind it is a worm-eating warbler, and above you black-throated green. It's just absolutely a spectacular experience, very easy birding and enjoyable.
Fantastic. Great explanation, Stephan. Thanks. Patricia's just asking, a few years ago, the Nature Conservancy and the US Army had a very successful joint project at Fort Hood for breeding golden-cheeked warbler and black-cap vireo. Do you know if the project is still ongoing?
Yeah, it's very ongoing there. They hire folks every year, and what they do is they focus on habitat restoration, monitoring of the nests, and particularly for the black-capped vireo, they do active brown-headed cowbird trapping. So even one of the reserves we will visit, they do brown-headed cowbird trapping there. But yes, that project is definitely ongoing, very successful, and Fort Hood has a healthy population of both species.
Excellent. Yeah, 2 super specials, those.
Yeah.
Diana's just asking on King Ranch. is Rock Jumper accompanied by a King Ranch escort, or is it open to individuals on their own, or does an individual have to join a tour to access the ranch? Because it's a pretty special place. How does that all work?
Yeah, so we have a local King Ranch guide when we visit, and then we ourselves, we know all the sites, we know exactly where we want to go and need to go. They do have a program that's open where you can contact them and schedule a group visit too. But unless, the tricky part with that is unless you have a large group, it is very costly. So it's actually, for us, it's even better because we already get there with a large group. So, but it is possible to visit on your own, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then just a quick one about the route itself. This is the 12-day and 5-day, but do we have a few 2-night stops, or is it all a bunch of one-nighters?
No, plenty of, I can actually break it down for you really quick. So first night is a 1-nighter near San Antonio, then 2 nights at Niels Lodge, so 2-nighter, 2 nights in Kingsville, and then 4 nights in Winnie. So that's a really nice stop where you can just drop your gear, and every day we'll be going out from Winnie no further than an hour to visit the different migrant traps and coastal refuges, and then 1 more night in the Piney Woods.
Yeah, excellent. And then, right, a couple more have come through over here. We've got quite a few folks still on the call.
You got the energy, Keith. Keep going.
Excellent. I certainly do. Yeah, we've got quite a lot of folks that have hung on here right till the end and obviously enjoying the Q&A. So we'll just continue going and finish off the questions. Karen's is asking, she's in the Houston area, and we've had hundreds of pine siskin for at least a couple months. This is the first time I've ever seen them. Are they likely to return as a regular in future years? What's your thoughts there, Stephan?
No, it's an eruptive year, so it's a really unusual year in terms of pine siskins, purple finches, red-breasted nuthatch. This happens only every few years. It's hard to predict when it will happen again. It's unlikely to happen again next year. It has to do with the production of seeds in the north in Canada. They actually do a finch prediction every year. But yeah, it's a very unusual year. And maybe we even still have some pine siskin lingering for our April tours, which would be new in that regard. But no, it's unlikely to become regular. It will happen again, but probably most likely in a few years. So enjoy them while they're there, because it is an unusual year this year for sure.
Absolutely. Catherine's just asking about migration and your thoughts around that. Does migration occur at night to reduce predation? Yeah,
so probably several things while birds fly at night. One is lower temperatures. So when birds are flying nonstop for up to 18 hours, they produce a lot of body heat. So the lower temperatures at night help dissipate that excess heat and keeps them from overheating. There's usually less wind at night, so less turbulent conditions, and of course also less predators. I've actually been out in the Gulf of Mexico during fall, and every once in a while you'll see a migrant maybe left too late migrating during the day. I remember we had an eastern phoebe flying out there, and a long-tailed jaeger came by and caught the eastern phoebe. So definitely there are predators out there during the day. So they avoid predation at night.
Absolutely. Great, Stephan. And then last question, which is actually not really Texas oriented, but I think some folks have been doing a bit of blog reading and a bit of social media looking at it. And I know some folks have been out to the site as well, but we've had a couple of questions, folks asking about your recent encounters with a certain ground cuckoo in Costa Rica. Maybe you could take 2 minutes and describe that experience. I know you and Peter Kessner, got some extraordinary views of an incredibly special bird out there.
Okay, yeah, that was quite the adventure and experience. I'll try to describe it briefly, but I had the chance to go to Costa Rica and do a little bit of a cleanup trip, and one of the birds I still needed, just of a handful, was the ground cuckoo. And there had been a recent sighting at Rincon de la Vieja National Park. So I traveled over there with my wife, Claudia. And lo and behold, I step out of the car and I'll bump into Peter Kessner. who was there with another friend of mine from Costa Rica. And happens we were both looking for the ground cuckoo. As it goes, first day was unsuccessful. Second day I returned. I went for a long slog, for a very long hike in heavy rain, really bad conditions. I saw nothing. Peter had the patience. He staked out a promising spot where there was some ant activity, and he located the bird, and he was able to text me and let me know, and I was able to return to that spot. I crouched in the thicket for about an hour and a half before I saw the tail of the bird for the first time. And I moved really slowly, and over time, I guess the bird got used to my presence, and at the very end, I was able to walk up to it. I mean, I didn't, but I was tempted to reach out and sort of touch it. I mean, it was ridiculously tame and for some reason unconcerned. It was really focused on the ants. The ants were also focused on me by that time. And the next day, luckily, I was able to return with my wife. We relocated the ant swarm, which had moved quite a bit. This time it took 15 minutes of waiting, and the bird was, again, actively feeding, very approachable. So definitely a highlight, and a huge thanks to Peter, who had the requisite patience there to stake out that spot until the bird, I think he staked it out for a full day and then several hours. So yeah, congrats to him, and I was really happy to be able to see that bird.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks for the nice condensed.
Yeah.
Relay. I mean, that's extraordinary. I mean, all ground cuckoos. It doesn't matter whether you're in South or Central America or Asia. They're all incredible birds to see. Yeah. But anyway, we digress from Texas. Yeah, for all the folks who are still on, there's a whole bunch of you that are still on. So thanks so much for sticking right till the end. And yeah, thanks for all the questions. Thanks to Nikki and to Stephan as well. Just a fantastic presentation. Brought back some amazing memories of Texas for me. And yeah, sort of longing to go back to go and see a few of the ones that I missed. It's been a good 13 years now. So yeah, one of those things. It'll hopefully in good time. But yeah, thanks so much. All right.
A quick
yes,
note
Nikki, sorry.
Francisco said he's so they're very frustrated for missing your presentation, and I'm sorry because the US times have changed. We will be emailing out the webinar to you as soon as it's loaded up onto our YouTube channel, so that you can still watch everything. So just to let you know.
Great, thanks for that, Nikki. Thank you. Yeah, and yes, good point to remember those time changes. Yeah, all the clocks have gone back, and I know the UK as well is shifting shortly as well. I think 28th of March. Those clocks are shifting as well, an hour. So keep that in mind too. All right. Thanks again, Stephan. Thanks again, Nikki.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for your time. See you soon, hopefully.
Bye.